Possible early ceasefire scenario. Given the significant disparity in military capabilities between Palestine and Israel, as well as ongoing international mediation efforts, it is likely that the current conflict between them will have a higher probability of concluding early rather than prolonged warfare. Israel stands as one of the most militarily powerful nations in the Middle East, giving them an upper hand in the conflict against Palestinian armed group, Hamas. Israel has been conducting indiscriminate airstrikes on the Gaza Strip, while Hamas has responded with rocket attacks, but the Israeli military's superiority is evident. Additionally, the ongoing international mediation efforts serve as a factor supporting the likelihood of an early ceasefire. Major countries such as the United States and the European Union are making efforts to facilitate dialogue between both sides for the restoration of peace. The United Nations Security Council has also urgently called for an immediate cessation of the conflict. Of course, the possibility of the war escalating cannot be entirely ruled out. Hamas may exploit civilian casualties resulting from Israeli airstrikes to garner international sympathy and increase pressure on Israel. Moreover, the involvement of other armed groups from Arab nations like Hezbollah in Lebanon or Syrian rebel factions could further complicate the conflict. However, taking into account the current disparities in military capabilities and the ongoing international mediation, it seems more likely that this conflict will end early rather than be prolonged. Below are potential scenarios for how this conflict might conclude. Israeli military victory. Israel completely seizes control of the Gaza Strip and forces Hamas to disarm. This could potentially lead to increased discontent among Palestinians and sow the seeds of a long-term conflict. Mutual compromise. Both sides reach compromises on key issues such as borders and autonomy. This scenario could usher in the beginning of a more robust peace process along with a ceasefire. Successful international mediation. The international community successfully mediates between the two parties, leading to the signing of a peace agreement. This is the most ideal scenario, where lasting peace in the Middle East could be achieved. In conclusion, along with the cessation of the current conflict, efforts to fundamentally resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict should be pursued. Both sides must acknowledge each other's existence and seek ways to coexist peacefully. Scenario of unpredictable outcome. The current conflict between Palestine and Israel began on October 7, 2023, and as of now, it continues. The war started when the Palestinian armed group, Hamas, initiated rocket attacks and shelling towards Israel, which led to Israel launching indiscriminate airstrikes on the Gaza Strip, causing an escalation. The direction of this conflict remains uncertain, but the following possibilities can be considered. Potential for prolonged warfare. Both Israel and Palestine express a desire to end the conflict, but significant differences in their positions and the challenging international mediation situation could contribute to the war's prolongation. Possibility of ground escalation. Israel has primarily relied on aerial attacks thus far, but if Hamas's attacks persist, there is a potential for a ground invasion. In the event of a ground invasion, civilian casualties are expected to increase. Prospects of diplomatic resolution. There is a possibility that international mediation could lead to a ceasefire and diplomatic resolution. However, the substantial disparities in positions between both sides and the difficulties associated with international mediation make a diplomatic solution challenging to achieve. Predicting the precise outcome of the conflict remains difficult at this time. However, in the event of prolonged warfare, it is anticipated that the suffering on both sides will intensify, and the overall instability in the Middle East region will worsen. Several factors can influence the direction of the conflict, including disparities in positions between Israel and Palestine. Israel does not recognize Palestinian armed resistance and opposes the establishment of a Palestinian state. Conversely, Palestinians seek an end to Israeli occupation and the creation of an independent state. The greater the disparity in positions, the higher the likelihood of prolonged conflict. International mediation. The international community, including the United States, the European Union, and the United Nations, is urging both sides to cease hostilities and seek resolution through dialogue. If international mediation succeeds, there is a possibility of ending the war and pursuing a diplomatic solution. Hamas's military capability. Hamas possesses rocket launch and shelling capabilities against Israel. The stronger Hamas's military capabilities, the greater the likelihood that Israel will strengthen its military response. Israeli public opinion. The Israeli population has strong reservations about Palestinian armed resistance. As Israeli public opinion becomes more steadfast against such actions, the Israeli government is likely to increase its military response. The outcome of the conflict will be shaped by the influence of these factors. Monitoring the situation closely and making efforts to predict the direction of the conflict will be crucial in the days ahead. Scenario of prolonged conflict. The current conflict between Palestine and Israel is likely to become prolonged for the following reasons. Core conflict issues remain unresolved, both sides have not found common ground on key issues. Israel does not recognize the independence of the Palestinian people, while Palestinians aim to end Israeli occupation. As long as these core conflict issues remain unresolved, progress in peace negotiations is challenging. Military capacities are balanced. Israel holds a military advantage, but Palestinian groups like Hamas can still inflict significant harm on Israel. Hence, both sides find it challenging to achieve a decisive military victory to end the conflict. Limited international engagement. The involvement of the United States and the European Union in mediating between Israel and Palestine faces difficulties in bridging the gaps between the parties. Therefore, international engagement alone may not be sufficient to bring about an end to the war. Due to these factors, there is a high likelihood that this current conflict will be prolonged, causing an escalation of damages for both sides. Furthermore, the war could exacerbate the instability in the Middle East and provoke international conflicts. However, there is also a possibility of an early ceasefire. If both parties consider the costs of the war and actively participate in international mediation, the conflict could end sooner. The following is a possible scenario if the conflict becomes prolonged. Escalation to an all-out confrontation. If Israel initiates a ground invasion of Gaza or Palestinian armed groups expand attacks on Israeli territory, a full-scale confrontation could ensue. International terrorism spillover. If Palestinian armed groups conduct terrorist attacks against Israel and Western countries, the conflict could escalate into international terrorism. Deepening Middle East instability. If the current conflict spreads to other regions in the Middle East, the overall instability in the area could worsen. This current war represents a significant opportunity to address the Israel-Palestine conflict. Recognizing that there is nothing to gain from continuing the war and redirecting efforts towards progress in peace negotiations should be the focus for both parties.